To marry or not to marry. Now, you're probably watching this video because you have asked yourself the same question, whether or not you should get married. I'm at the age of 35 years right now, and I'm 1 week away from being 36. And when I turned 30, I made a decision. I said, if I'm at the age of 35 and I'm still single, now I've got a decision that I have to make. And that decision has to do with the fact that I have to evaluate or reevaluate my life to ask myself whether or not marriage would be a viable option. Is it something that brings value in my life? Do I see it enhancing my life in some way, in a way that is different? Or do I see it adding some kind of a value that I currently don't have at the moment? Now, mind you, at age 30, I was very different. My thinking was different. Maturity level was different. What's different between being 30 and being 35? 5 year gap is a long time. Now, the funny thing about it is, nothing has actually really changed in terms of that view. And usually, if you always look at yourself 5 years back, typically you would kind of see a lot of changes in the way that you think. Not that I haven't seen a lot of progress or change in the way that I currently think as opposed to my 30-year-old. Then there is a lot of difference in the way that I think. My perception of life is very different. My viewpoint of that decision hasn't really changed because that was coming from what is real. I have to evaluate myself and my life in terms of where I am and what I'm doing. So career-wise, I'm happy where I am career-wise. I'm happy with what I'm doing. As a creative individual, creative people are very unique people because we think very differently. We think about the world very differently. Our preferences and our taste. Mind you, everybody, human beings, are designed to be selfish by nature. That's how God created us. That is why he says he's a jealous God. And every time we focus on ourselves and we want what we want, it's only based on what we want as people. It's not based on what God wants. So the moment we realize that God wants us to do what honors him, it brings glory to him because it is what he takes glory in, or it is what glorifies him because it's about him. Glory and honor belongs to him. Suddenly there's a different pull that pulls us to a different direction as people. And most people who tend to rebel either against the Bible or against God are people who can't let go of something that they love, something that has to do with what satisfies them, themselves, and what they want. So we are always in conflict with ourselves, number one, okay? Before we realize that in order to honor God with our lives, we have to do what is pleasing to him. It's about him. It pulls us away to gravitate towards everything else that is about God and what God wants. And that is where the big conflict is, because we are selfish beings. He built us in that way, but he also built us in such a way that we can be able to give ourselves fully to him. Okay, where does relationships come into play with regards to that? That's wherein I have to give myself to somebody. And marriage requires you to do that. You have to absolutely give yourself to somebody. And giving yourself to somebody means you got to be willing to sacrifice a lot of that selfishness. There's a lot of selfishness where everything comes from, whether it's from sexuality to your lifestyle. You have to adjust a lot of things in terms of your lifestyle. So if you are a creative person, it's going to be very difficult for you to adjust your life in a lot of ways, unless if you marry somebody who also comes from the creative industry and they understand the pros and cons of being a creative individual, an artistic person, because I'm very picky about everything in terms of how I renovate my household, why the walls have to be white. That influences the light and what the videos might look like. There may be a tint of it's a certain yellow, a bright yellow or blue or whatever, and why I can't have pictures in certain areas of the room or whatever, why certain rooms can be, can have color schemes and not, and so on. And I have to understand that if I get into a relationship, that might change or it might be influenced. A lot of decisions will be influenced by who I'm with. And that person has to understand all those type of things, or I have to be willing to compromise that as well. And that applies in almost everything. So everything's a negotiation, everything becomes a compromise. That's when it becomes very, very tricky, because you think differently, and you have to be willing to understand that in as much as I think differently, I'm also with somebody who also thinks differently as well. And that's where it gets really, really tricky, because it's not just about me, it's also about her. I have to then also be willing to kind of think about what does she want as a person, who is she as a person, and learn that as I go, because it's a process. So the question is, am I willing to get into that process with somebody, and does it bring value to my life in some way that is different from what might be lacking right now? And the answer to that question, it all really depends, because I'm open to having that, but at the same time there has to be a reason why. Because I feel like at the rate that I'm at right now, I don't feel like there's something that's missing so much in my life that I can't do without marriage. I could live my life right now next year with everything going the way it's going, and I'll be cool with it. So if I could do that for the next year, I could probably, do I see myself doing that for the next 5 years? If I see myself doing that for the next 5 years, I can do that for the next 10 years, right? 10 years, I'll be 45 years old. Okay. Going from 45 to 55, because by the time I reach my 40s, do I have the energy to raise a child or to have children at that age and time? It's also, it's quite a challenging mentality. There's still people who are in their 40s who have children at that age. So I haven't ruled out anything. So my biggest fear is, if I say fear or something that I'm uncertain of, is having to be at a certain age and feeling like I'm starting life at a much later age and stage, which is probably maybe not the most desirable. But you know what? Look, it is what it is. I'm not one to rule out life. I'm one to just live life and let it happen according to however it works out. But I'm also not afraid of exploring life and living life according to whatever might be the circumstance. I don't know about you and why you are asking yourself. You might be asking yourself the same question. Do you feel like you need to be married or not be married?